Hello, this is Dr. Flight. It is great to reach out to you and to spend a little time talking about SWOT analysis. This segment, SWOT analysis, is in the context of doing an environmental scan, which happens during organizational planning. And so the environmental scan deals with the outside the firm elements, but at the same time we look at strengths and weaknesses, which would be internal and inside the firm elements too, and those are the major concepts that are associated with SWOT analysis. So again, we'll spend a little bit of time looking at this concept, and thanks again for taking the time to listen in, and if you have any questions, please follow up with me. Thanks. Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and get started and look at the concept of a SWOT analysis. And as I mentioned, the context here is to evaluate the general environment in which you find yourself to do business, or the environment of the organization finds itself as it needs to do operations and planning and things like that. So to plan properly, managers need to know what the firm does well and the areas that pose the most risk to it, and where it can succeed in terms of taking advantage of its strengths and building its opportunities. So marketing then, in kind of the context that we're going to look at it, is that we often look to identify where our strengths are so that we can develop those strengths and use them to differentiate ourselves from our competition. And so from a marketing perspective, we want to find points of difference between us and our competition so that the market, our customers or our clients, will choose us because we solve their need, we solve their problem better than our competitors. And the reason why is because we do it differently, because we leverage our strengths and the things that we do well. So identifying our strengths is a big deal, in terms of this whole thing, because of the context that it helps us compete. It helps us form a platform of competition, which allows us to differentiate ourselves, make ourselves different from our other options that are available to the client. Okay, so we're going to begin by talking a little bit about the environmental environment, or the internal environment. And we look specifically towards weaknesses and strengths when we think about the internal environment that's there. So strengths then, we think of as being elements that we have that can be leveraged into a competitive advantage. Our strengths may come in some physical assets that we own, like we own a factory, we are located at a location that's like a piece of real estate that's valuable. We have processes, we have production lines and things like that. Other types of strengths that you can leverage would be financial strengths, like you may have a lot of money coming in, cash flow, you may have low debt, you may have access to donors, and maybe grants or endowments. For instance, universities have large endowments. They have a strong financial way to leverage that over their competitors. Other resources come in the form of contracts or patents. Organizational strengths include things like the culture of the firm, the brand equity, the structure of the firm. You may have strong ties or relationships with partners. Those partners are relational strengths that you may have. And then finally, you may have a strong ability to use information to your advantage. That's actually a resource in and of itself, to be able to gather, share, and utilize, analyze information to gain a competitive advantage. So strengths then are things that we analyze, things that we do well, and specifically a strength that we want to think of. Again, you could call it a resource, if you will, that you tap into, but a strength is really important to us if we can leverage it to gain some type of advantage in the marketplace or towards our competition. Okay, so a strength doesn't really do anything for us unless we use it. That's basically the bottom line. So if it can be used to gain an advantage in the marketplace, in other words, to treat customers better or clients, maybe we can serve more clients with the strength we have, something along those lines, then that's what we think of as something positive there. Weaknesses, of course, are the opposite. There are two types of weaknesses that we could talk about. Inherent weaknesses, which prohibit or help prevent an organization from fully operating. These inherent weaknesses are weaknesses that we have within our organization that we have difficulty correcting. That are challenges. Here's an example of an inherent weakness within a religious organization. A religious organization may be required to have a religious leader as its CEO or as its primary organizational leader. So in other words, there may be a church or a synagogue or a mosque or some religious organization that within its culture and within its hierarchy requires that the religious leader also be the financial leader of the organization. Problem is that religious leader may not be very good at running an organization. They might not be very good at handling finances. They may not be very good at handling people and HR and things like that. They may be fantastic spiritual leaders, but they might not be a very good business or organizational leader. And so as a result, there's this inherent weakness of leadership because of the structure of the organization. So that's kind of, and again, this is something that would be very difficult to overcome. It's very difficult to fix that problem, that weakness, in a real way. But of course, it's something that needs to be addressed probably. The other type of weakness are failures of structure, strategy, and poor tactics or execution. So we have two different types of weaknesses. One is a weakness that's inherent into the organization that's very difficult to address and ultimately change. The other types of weaknesses are when we just don't operate well there, and we need better guidance and better ways to manage ourselves. Those are the weaknesses that we can address, that we can change, and that we can update. So failures in structure, strategy, and poor tactics or execution are examples of weaknesses that are changeable for us, whereas inherent weaknesses are less so. All right, so those are internal issues. So those are the strengths and the weaknesses that we looked at. Strengths coming in those 7 or 8 different areas that we can identify strengths in, and then weaknesses being 2 different types of weaknesses, inherent and then operational. Let's now look at external evaluations, so things that are outside the firm, opportunities and threats, which we'll look at here in just a second. Generally speaking, when we think about the environment outside the firm, we can break this into sort of 3 different kind of compartments, if you will. And this is more so for a nonprofit, the public environment, and then a competitive environment, and then a macro environment. So the public environment is a little bit more of an issue when we're dealing with nonprofits, although it's becoming much more kind of conscientious for the for-profits as well. And generally, when we think about the public environment, what we want to think about is kind of like public relations. We often think of this, the outside the firm as consisting of groups of people or quote unquote publics, and the idea that we want to manage the impression of publics is this idea like we want people to think about us in a positive way. We want to be able to manage how people think about us. This may be an extension of, or kind of the nexus or nucleus of branding, brand equity, like brand image and things like that. But this is what we want to think about when we think about the public environment. So publics, if we were going to think about who they are and why they matter, they're groups of people who have interests in our organization. So they may be groups of donors, they may be groups of investors, they may be government agencies, they may be, again, the clients or the people that we serve. It could be a community of people who are concerned about the cause that we're concerned about. But they're groups of individuals or people or organizations that have an interest in us. They possess an opinion about our organization, so they have a thought that they think of us. They like us, they don't like us, they are motivated by us, they are concerned of us, so they have an opinion about us. They're grouped and organized. So we do this where we group these these publics together, and then we usually position campaigns towards them. We usually do some type of messaging campaign towards a specific public, and so they're grouped that way. So we want to craft then a message towards them in a way that we want to manage their opinion. So if we have a group of people who we're concerned with, we want to be able to focus some attention to them to help manage their opinion of us. That's the public. So this is really a public relations concept. It's really a PR perspective in how we can manage that. And remember, we have three groups of folks who are generally extremely important to us: clients, donors, and then volunteers. If you think about, we want to motivate the behavior of these three groups of people or publics, then it falls into this public environment notion pretty well in terms of how we want to manage and craft their opinion of us. So that's the public environment. When we start talking about competition, there's competition that comes in a lot of different areas, if you will. So in market economies, competition helps serve to create better services and products for consumers. So some nonprofits may be working towards a public good, and they may view competition as hurtful or as an insult, or you might get your feelings hurt if somebody else tries to solve the same public need that you have. And that's pretty typical or natural. Competitors may be thought of as counterproductive by nonprofits because they fragment the market. They split up the clients, and they also divert resources away from you. So if you think about going out and getting money from donors or getting volunteers to help you, and you've got a competitor who's also doing the same thing, then that can be thought of as kind of negative. Now, there can be the flip of this too. Competitors often make you a better organizational leader. They help you do things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. But organizational competition can be very concerning for any number of reasons. Uniquely, or there's something called a goods dominated service, or a service where you have to have high infrastructure to be able to operate. So sometimes organizations actually act as monopolists in the nonprofit area because there's a scarcity of resources. One example may be a hospital. Usually in a community, the community can't support more than one hospital, for instance, because of the economic cost of creating a hospital. So in that sense, one community may be dominated by a nonprofit and only a nonprofit, and they behave kind of like a monopolist because there's so much expense or cost built into it. Another example of limited resources that kind of stymies competition is again resources that maybe not so much financial but volunteers. Consider if you have again a community and you're running a recreational sports organization, there are only so many people who can volunteer as a coach, and so it would be difficult to have multiple sports organizations that rely on volunteer coaching because there are only so many volunteer coaches in a community. So again, organizational competition can be very challenging. There can be lots of reasons to be concerned for it. And again, sometimes nonprofit organizational leaders get their feelings hurt because they feel like nobody else should do their job for the public except for them. Now, again, on the flip side of this, while competition can be viewed in an adversarial perspective, there are benefits to having competitors that you compete with. There's no question that society as a whole and the public absolutely benefits from competitors. So while as an organizational leader I may not like competition, having competition actually forces a much better product for the consumer to receive, even if it means that I don't serve everybody, or I only serve some of the people, and I have to fight for the clients that I have. The clients ultimately get served better by having competition. So competition's better for society, even though I don't like it so much as an organizational leader. Three things to remember on the positive side of competition. Competitors bring greater awareness to the cause that I'm focused on. Multiple nonprofits could collectively serve more clients than a single nonprofit can do, and thus we do a better public good by having competitors. Competitors also allow nonprofits to specialize in a more narrow service, and we end up specializing in a more narrow service, which means that our clients that we serve get better service overall. So it allows us then to do a better job in relative terms regarding the social cause if we have lots of nonprofits working together in a competitive environment. Number three, competitors help you become more sharp and more skilled at doing business or doing marketing, if you will. You can't afford to be sloppy or lazy in your operational strategy or in your marketing execution if you have competition. Competitors make you a better organization because it forces you to do a better job. Okay, so organizational level competition then, while yes, lots and lots of nonprofit leaders get their feelings hurt because they've got competition, and they view it as a negative and an adversarial type of a thing. In the big scheme of things, having competition very much helps the client, very much helps the social cause in a lot of different ways. So, so don't feel like competition is it's going to make you sharper. It's going to make you better at the end of the day. Okay, other forms of competition that need to be talked about don't necessarily deal with organizational competition, but deal with something called behavioral competition. So when a consumer looks to buy a product or looks to satisfy a need, they often look for all of the different ways that need could be satisfied. If I want to travel, for instance, from St. Louis to Chicago, I could take a bus, I could take the train, I could take a car, I could get on an airplane. I got four different, popular ways to be able to get from point A to point B. So if I'm, for instance, running a bus company, my competition isn't so much against other bus companies, but it's also against substitute products, and other options that the customer has in order to satisfy that need. So we have then this idea of behavioral. What, like here's an example. What desire do I want to satisfy? Do I want to work? Do I want to exercise? Do I want to, I could spend a lot of time at work, exercising and household chores. If I'm doing that, I'm not entertaining myself. I'm not going to see a show. I'm not doing other things. So like in competition with entertainment are other activities I could do. So we have this thing called desire competition then. So desire competition. I could go up to Chicago for the weekend to enjoy just a vacation, or I could work over the weekend, or I could spend time with the kids over the weekend, with family, with friends, and things like that. Um, so first and foremost, there's this desire competition that happens. Then once you make a desire competition decision, then you start getting into what we call variates or variations within that category. So in this case, I decided I wanted to do something that would entertain me. And so what are my options for entertainment? Here, TV at home, going to see a movie, or going to see a live performance right there. So maybe I choose that. This is generic competition. Okay, so generic competition or would help us, because we've got these variations of ways we can satisfy our desire. Now we've got live performances. What type of live performance do I want to go to? Do I want to go to a symphony, or do I want to go to a nightclub? Do I want to go to a rock concert? Here's a Broadway musical option. So form competition is the form of the entertainment that I'm going to engage in, and then I actually decide, okay, I've got different Broadway musical choices I've got to choose from. And now I'm going to be like, well, what one do I want to choose? What would be the best thing for me? This is enterprise competition. Okay, so very importantly, behavior can be distinguished by different levels of competition. We often view a product market array, sometimes is something we call this, where we have different levels where we choose the desire competition, the desire, then the generic, then the form, and then the enterprise forms of competition. So review those and know each form, each level of behavioral competition, because we're competing at that as well. We're trying to find different levels of competitors. And again, substitute products kind of fall in that area sometimes as well. All right, which then leads us to this last part of the external concern. So opportunities and strengths again are kind of what we're opportunities and threats, excuse me, are what we're looking at in the external environment. We had the notion of behavioral competition. We had the notion of regular kind of direct competition. We had the notion of public environment. Now we have the idea of a macro level environment. So usually with the macro environment, we look at 4 or 5 or 6 different broad areas that influence the organization. So this is a lot of market research or just research in general, where we look at like the legal and political regulations, for instance, taxes, those types of things. We look at the socioeconomic, sociocultural, that type of environment, the demographics of the people that we serve and how those are changing. New technologies, research and development, new ways to serve and complete the tasks that we have. Economic shifts, and then shifts in the environment and nature. So at the macro level, sometimes this is sometimes called a situational analysis, or environmental scan is this portion of this SWOT analysis, where we do a little bit of a descriptive. We write up elements that are changing in these 5 different areas and how they're going to impact us as an organization. So this might be a page or two in a plan, like a marketing plan or a business plan, where we discuss the elements in the broader environment that we feel are going to pose either threats to us or opportunities to us as we move forward. Okay, so we covered a lot of material here when we talked about the SWOT analysis as a whole. We have internal and external elements that provide either strengths and weaknesses or opportunities and threats. So when we looked at the internal environment, again, we looked at different types of weaknesses that were inherent to the firm or ones that could be correctable within the structure or operation. We also looked at strengths, though, that happened in 6 different areas of the organization, like in the finance, the organizational, relational, and so forth. Okay, so be able to identify where strengths come from in the organization and what types of weaknesses there are. In the external environment and evaluation, we had 3 different levels. We had the public environment, then we had competitive environment, but the competitive environment also included organizational direct competitors as well as behavioral levels of competition. And then finally, we had 5 different areas in the macro environment that were things to scan and to evaluate. There were from the political area and legal and regulatory area, sociocultural area, the technology changes in the economy, and then also changes in the natural environment as well. Okay, so a lot of material is dealt with when we deal with a SWOT analysis. And again, this is important for the organizational planning level of a marketing plan or a business plan. Doing this type of analysis helps you form the strategy that you'll ultimately use to reach your customers and clients, and also greater donor giving and volunteers as well. So, okay, that's what we have to cover for this. Again, reach out to me. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for your time, and I'll talk with you soon.